So welcome bloggers, welcome authors. These are amazing authors. These are amazing bloggers. For you guys, these are, I think, a few of the biggest bloggers from the Netherlands. And they all have a specialty.
And having loved fantasy my entire life, to see magical people who look like me, like my imagination went crazy. And then I saw, like 8 months later, I saw a picture of this black girl with like bright green hair, and it was this digital illustration, actually by a Belgian artist. But again, it was so magical that my mind was like, oh, who is this? What's her story? What does her world look like? So it was kind of the combination of seeing myself in a magical setting that kind of opened my imagination for Children of Blood and Bone.
Your hair
Blood and bend.
How much of mythology did you borrow, and how much did you make up?
There was so much that I would say for the magic system, that's where I kind of tried to stay as true as I could, and then for details, because it's also a religion that people practice.
Oh, right.
So I wanted to, I had to be very careful to not just say like, oh, this is pretty and this person does fire, but like to really go into the actual, as much text as there is talking to actual like priest of the religion. So the magic system is really based in it, and then there's details for people who practice it. Well, they'll be like, oh, I recognize that color there. I know what that Easter egg is. So they're very subtle, but I wanted the people who this isn't new for to feel like it was a genuine representation of something that I think is so beautiful that I wish I'd known about like for a while.
I just got chills. I think my inspiration was I've been reading a lot of dystopian novels, and those, all imagine the end of the world, basically. How does society collapse? Which is something I'm very interested right now, but something I'm even more interested in is what happens afterwards. How do you recover? After a shift like that, how do you re-examine your values as a society? Are you going to do better the next time, or are you going to repeat the mistakes of the past? So I see science fiction as a little more hopeful than dystopian, and imagining, rebuilding a world even if it doesn't go according to plan. So I think that was my inspiration. I was particularly interested in what would happen if we get a second chance to reestablish the human civilization on Earth, and what would happen if teenagers were in charge. Would they repeat the mistakes of the past, or would they have a vision for a better future? And how closely are they going to stick with their values, and how much are they going to be corrupted by the adults who want to influence them? And I think, looking at the political situation now, they're going to die. They're not letting adults boss them around at all, so I'm very pleased.
For us, it's like, your wealth or lack thereof can really affect your quality and your length of life. And then at a micro level, if you've ever had a wage job, you're told your time is worth like, $12 or $20 or whatever an hour. So what if that sort of abstract truth was made really physical and concrete, and what would that world look like? How would it be like ours, and how would it be different from ours? So, yeah.
It's a very scary world.
Ours is pretty scary too.
That's true.
So I had just written a fantasy series that didn't end up selling to a publisher, and I was feeling really like lost in publishing generally. So I started writing this thing that was just meant to make my best friends laugh. Like, I had no intention of getting it published. So I was putting it on Wattpad and just sending them the link to Wattpad, and then suddenly woke up and had 40,000 reads and was like, oh, yeah. So my agent was like, hey, maybe we should take that off Wattpad and try and possibly sell it. So it had a different plot back then, and the plot was actually that Izzy was pregnant after a one-night stand, and she didn't know who the father was. But we ended up taking that plot out and making it something that was much more current. So that one-night stand ends up online, basically. She has a one-night stand with a politician's son on a garden bench, and someone takes a picture and uploads it to the internet, and everything kind of goes crazy because of who he is. So yeah, it took a little bit of time to work out exactly what my inspiration was beyond I want to tell some jokes. But hopefully the finished product also has something to say, as well as making people laugh. So.
Why did you all decided to write YA from everything you can write? Why YA?
I think I never made a conscious decision to write YA. It's just what I have always read, and what I was writing since I was a young adult myself. So I guess I'm just sort of comfortable in that voice. And I also really love, you know, everything that's happening in YA, especially now. I think some of the most interesting, you know, interesting conversations are happening in the YA space.
I think like teenagers in real life inspire me so much that I wanted to write about them. I think they're so much fiercer and so much bolder than adults can be, because you kind of lose that edge when you start to grow up. And they're so passionate about everything, including politics. And like you see that we've just kind of touched on this, but the way the world is now, like it's the teenagers that are going to save us, especially, you know, in the States with March for Our Lives and everything. But we also kind of saw it in the UK last year with, so we had a general election and the youth vote really surprised us all, because the teenagers turned out in their masses and voted for the left, where the general population was doing something different. So I wanted to create a character who had that same kind of like drive and motivation for political change, not necessarily because she wanted to be the saviour and she wanted to be the chosen one, but because she had to be, because she didn't like the way the world was and the way it was treating her, so she has to fight back. And the sequel is going to be a lot more political in that sense, because I think it reflects what's happening in the world. But yeah, I couldn't imagine writing a story like this with an adult protagonist. I just don't think they would respond the same way or like fight back as strongly against it.
For me, it was, you know, I always grew up reading kind of middle grade and young adult books, and I think maybe it was more of a natural thing for me to just write in that space. But to be honest, when I wrote it, I didn't know what age group I was writing for. I was kind of just writing it for myself, and I think it was more of just an instinct. And when I sent it to agents, they were like, well, this is kind of young adult, but kind of younger, but also kind of older. So they sent it to, they didn't really know where it's at, so they sent it to lots of adult publishers and lots of children's and young adult publishers. And it ended up being the young adult publishers who kind of reacted best to it, and now I'm a young adult author. But I think young adult is a really special genre, and the best thing about it is that anyone can read it. I think someone as young as 10 years old could read a young adult book, depending on the content, but then you get a lot of adults reading it. I have fans in the US military. I have fans whose parents read to them when they're about 8 or 9 years old. I get messages from grandmas, you know, who read it with their grandsons, and it's. I love young adult for that reason. I think it's a really special genre.
Always read young adult, always written young adult, and I've never wanted to do something else. Like if someone's like, write a story for adults, I was like, okay, it's just gonna be someone doing their taxes. Like, we're very boring. But writing for, like especially the way the youth is mobilizing in the world right now. Before this book, I was pretty hopeless about the state of things, and it's been so wonderful to get to have an excuse to like talk to teenagers and just to see their passion and just the way they're thinking about the world, and they're so empathetic, and it just like I said I was hopeless, and meeting them I've been like, okay, we're gonna be fine. We just need to last long enough for you guys to be in charge. I also think no other genre, no other time in your life can a book like imprint itself on your heart than when you're a kid, because even the things we read now, like you can love them so deeply, but when you're young, the books you love, they really make an impact on you. And I just think having a genre where you can make that impression on someone, like I wouldn't want to do anything else.
You said you started this when you were hopeless. Do you think you would have written a different book if you had started a year later?
No, the thing is, it's still, it's hard. It's weird because in my own life, I go through cycles of, like when I started this, I was hopeless, and then it made me really hopeful. But then like the morning it hit the bestsellers list, I was in an airport crying because of the Austin bomber. And I found out there was a person in Austin, Texas, and they were targeting the family members of black leaders. So I was really scared. I was also scared because I was going to Texas twice, like a week after that and then a week after that. And so I was in that same place of like fear that I had been when I wrote this book. But then I was also like, okay, but you were scared and you wrote this, and it's, you know, it's doing something. So it doesn't necessarily mean the fear stops or that the trouble stops, but it's more of a reminder that's like, okay, but keep pushing past that, because you don't have to live in that. You know, you've seen the results of not living in that. So it's kind of a cycle, but with more, I guess, hope each time, if that makes sense.
For me, I think the premise of the 100 sort of demands it be YA, because it's about teenagers being sent to recolonize Earth. And I'm also a young adult editor, so it's just the way I've been thinking about stories and storytelling for a while. So it's sort of a no-brainer for me.
I want to ask you something about you do write YA, but is there in any of your books a big message you want to give to your readers, because it's teens, it's young adults, so what is your biggest message you wanted to bring with the books?
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't say that I set out to send a message to readers, but I would like to think that people would take away from Everlist that, you know, time is precious and everyone's time is equally precious, and also that you should stand by your friends.
I think I've been quite not lucky, and it makes me really sad that the world is like this, but I started writing the book before all the Me Too stuff started happening, and I had no idea how relevant it would be. So I hope the message that teens take away is that it doesn't have to be like that, and you can hope for a better future. And like, if you're a woman and you're a young woman, the world will see you a certain way, but you're allowed to fight back against that, and you don't just have to like lie down and take it. Like, I was speaking to my mum about it, and she told me this story of how when she was in school, and like in primary school, so really young, and a male teacher would bring them up to the front of the class and kind of like grope them, and they were, you know, 6 or 7, and she had gone home and told my mum, my gran, sorry, what happened. She's like, oh, it's just the way it is. And I like to think that by adults sharing this message that we're like, it's not okay, we can A, show that they have a safe space and they can come to us and say, actually, this has happened, and we will listen and we will act on it. But also they can take that action themselves. If no adults are listening, they can do it too. So.
And do you think because of, it's a huge thing right now, because of social media, it only makes it worse?
Yeah.
You can't get out of it?
I'm careful not to critique social media in the book, because I think social media is just a vehicle, and by focusing too much on social media, you're not thinking about why someone would do that to a young woman and how he should be punished for it. Sorry, spoilers. How they should be punished for it. So I'm careful to just talk very neutrally about social media, because I think with all things in life, social media has the power to be extremely positive. I don't think going back to March for Our Lives, that wouldn't have taken off the way it did without social media support. But it can be really terrible as well. And like, it's been like that since the dawn of time. Humans have always been both amazing and terrible to each other, and social media kind of amplifies that, and it puts it in broad daylight how people are treating each other. But it's not social media's fault. It's the trolls' fault, and it's the bad guys' fault. It's not social media's fault.
I think that authors who set out trying to teach a message to kids, not always, but often can end up seeming quite preachy. And I think kids should be allowed to make their own minds up about what they want to believe and what they want to make. So I think really all you can do is hold a mirror up to society in some ways, and let them kind of learn for themselves. So just having these things take place in your book. So my book has lots of themes. It has police brutality, it has the military-industrial complex, it has racism, it has sexism, it has class divisions and warfare. And what it really does is, it's not trying to say, you know, this is how you should think. It's more saying, this is what happens, now make your own opinion on how you feel about it, and this is how the main character feels about it. So I don't like to think that I have like a message saying like, racism is bad. I think it's, you know, I kind of would just hope that people walk away from it and have a better understanding of what racism is like, of what, you know, class warfare is like, and those things, and make decisions for themselves.
My book was written kind of with the same messages. I wanted to do the best. I wanted to portray the realities of being Black in America in the most relatable way possible. But I didn't want it to just be, there are like amazing books about that. I didn't want it to just be about that. I also love magic. So even if I tried to just do that, eventually it should be like, Abracadabra, please. So I wanted this big adventure that everyone could love, because I think if someone's favorite character becomes Ailey, that means something, no matter like what background that person comes from. Even the fact that like this is here in Dutch, I'm like, what am I doing here? I'm still confused. So I was like, how did I get here? And how is this book here? And who put these words? But the fact that like that story with some, like a girl who looks like me is like here and we're talking right now, I know that's really powerful. And then also for people who, like the readers who look like me who never had this, and even readers who don't look like me, because a lot of the things in this book, it's about living in a society that teaches you to hate what makes you magical. And I think everyone can relate to that in some way, shape, or form. So it's just, I wanted people to feel seen and heard with it. And so I don't know if that's fully a message or just more like, here are the things I wanted it to do. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, but I think people hate what they don't know. Maybe you created more empathy that people will think that there's more in the world.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it's a book that you wanted to read when you were young.
Yeah.
Something you missed.
I know there's that Toni Morrison quote, like if the book that you want to read doesn't exist, you have to write it.
Yeah.
And I was sitting with my German editor yesterday, and she was telling me about how when the scouts said, oh, there's this book, it's like Avatar: The Last Airbender in Africa. I was like, wait, I want to read that. You know, like I got re-excited all over again. I was like, that sounds awesome. So yeah, I definitely think that's a big part of this.
I definitely didn't set out to write a book with any sort of message. I just wanted to write something fun and exciting about strangely attractive space kids on an adventure. But the more I started to write and the more the characters evolved, you know, I think what I want the takeaway to be is that you can be a hero and deeply flawed at the same time. And if you wait for the people around you to be perfect, if you wait for yourself to be perfect, it's never going to happen. And my characters, you know, they've done some pretty awful things. They continue to do some pretty awful things, but they're also capable of bravery and kindness and courage. So yeah, it's sort of blurring the line between hero and anti-hero. And you can do the right thing because you're the right person for that moment, not necessarily because you're the best person.
So are there books that changed your teenage years?
Oh. I'll start this time so you guys can put me on the spot. I don't know if changed, but there are books I read that I think about probably in some capacity, like every day, every other day. Like probably not a day goes by that something doesn't remind me of The Giver or Matilda, you know, when they just become these like benchmarks for you and the way you think about the world. But the book that probably, let's see, Ender's Game, I read when I was 11 and got me interested in science fiction. But the book that sort of made me a reader, I think it's the Anne of Green Gables series. That's been translated into Dutch, right? Nothing happens in those books. Like, she makes a pie and it goes terribly wrong, and she talks about it for like 5 chapters. But it really taught me what you can do with character. If there's a character you care about, your reader will follow you, even if like it's about a Sunday school ice cream social. So it was the first book I read that made a fictional person feel as real as the people around me, and I still consider Anne one of my best friends. I love it.
I think well, obviously Harry Potter, so I feel like it's not worth talking about. It's like the foundation for every human. But I know the Outsiders, was that translated into Dutch by S.E. Hinton?
I believe so.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was the first book, yeah.
It wasn't a hit here in Holland.
Oh, okay. It was the first book I read. I remember I was like in 3rd grade, it was reading period, and something happened in the book and I started crying and I was so confused because I was like, what's happening to me? Why are there human tears for like what I really, as like I was young, so I didn't understand my emotional response. But it was the first time a book had made me feel that way. But then I really think the most impactful book for me is actually more recent, which is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. That book, I read that book and I was like, I need to write, and then this book came out. So that book, I can't even say that. It's just this.
The book series that really changed my life is one that I don't know if it's translated into Dutch, and to be honest, not that many people know about it in the US either. It was more of a successful book in the UK, and they're kind of out of print now. But it was a series called the Red Wall series by Brian Jacks, and it's about these kind of anthropomorphic animals who run around with swords and shields and armor, and they have these huge battles with each other. And they're these different species. So the rats are kind of the same, a little bit bigger than the mice, but the badgers are 3 times as big as the mice. So if you have a badger fighting with you with like a big axe, then it's pretty good. But these were children's books. It was really cool how they had like all these different like animal societies, and all this big like invading horde would come. In most books, there'd be some kind of enemy that would arrive and would have all the good animals would kind of band together and defeat this horde. And it really is what made me discover my love of epic fantasy, and also fantasy races and how they can have different cultures, like the different animals have different kind of cultures and things. And that's, you know, a lot of people say, oh, Lord of the Rings got me into epic fantasy and that kind of stuff. But for me, it was this children's book series by Brian Jacks. It really was amazing. And there's like 20 books in the series, and I really need to go back and just reread them all.
I mean, the obvious Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings are obviously the biggest part of my teenage years. But some books, again, we keep saying this, I don't know if they were translated into Dutch, and I don't even know if they did amazingly in the US because the humour is so British. But the Confessions of Georgia Nicholson series, it's Angus Thongs and Phil.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, you have it. And I think, so I was actually rereading them as an adult when I was writing the exact opposite of OK, and I think like a lot of the humour is inspired by that. But I just remember being so excited because in a lot of books I read when I was younger, so we grew up without much money, so I read a lot of my mum's like really old books, like all the Enid Blyton and stuff. So it was the first like really modern teenage girl that I'd encountered in fiction. But it was also the first series where the main character wasn't super serious all the time. Like, I think in all these books about saving the world, I loved them, but they were so intense, and this was just that kind of book that you constantly want to pick it up because it makes you feel really good, because laughing feels good. And it made me so excited because I always thought me and my friends were hilarious in school, but that's often not represented in fiction or in pop culture at all, really. Like, teenage girls aren't necessarily portrayed as funny. They're usually portrayed as bitchy or not very nice to each other.
Mean girls.
And there's always, yeah. Whereas these books were just so real, and they laughed about the things I laughed about, and I really wanted to recreate that in my book. So we kind of pitched it as Georgia Nicholson, except a bit more mature and a bit older, because it's a similar kind of like self-deprecating humour. And I love them so much, and they are those books that just make you really happy when you read them. So yeah.
You guys have all read The Mortal Instruments, right?
Yes.
Those I love books like Harry Potter where there's magic alongside our world, just because it's like there's so many possibilities. Like it could be just around the corner. But another little thing about I think it was in City of Bones, there's this little moment where the 2 main characters are like on a train and they look out the window and see 2 characters that are from another book by Holly Black. And I had like recognized that and then went and verified it online, but that was sort of the moment I realized where authors were real people and like make jokes and like, you know, reference each other like while they were alive. So that was kind of wild, and sort of what registered that this was actually a thing that real people could do. Was write books.
I love how you say it. You're like, I verified it.
I was like, am I just imagining it? But no, I wasn't. It was real.
If you can put one of your characters from your book in another book from another author, who would you want to put in which book? And why?
That follows up very nicely with
Yeah. Oh man, let me think. Can I put my main character Jules in just like any happy book? I feel like she would have a good time.
Maybe she wants to go have ice cream with Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah, let's do that. Actually, they would get along great. Let's do that.
I think my main character would do terribly in any fantasy world. She would just lie down and be like, nope, just let me die. I'm not interested in saving the world. I can't even do magic, so just... I would really like to put her in Becky Albertalli's books, because I feel like she's got really like similar humour to Simon and Leia and all those awesome characters. So yeah, I feel like that would be a really cool mashup.
I would like to put my main character in my diary, and then and I could hang out with him. But yeah, I know it's a really boring answer, but I grew up reading Harry Potter. It's kind of what got me into reading, and you know, I think that would be the coolest world to see your character in, just to see how they'd react.
What house would he be in?
Probably my main character, Fletcher, would probably be in Gryffindor, and then I'm not sure about Othello and Silver, the Sorting Hat would have to decide that one.
You haven't thought about this? Like, I know the houses of all my
I
characters.
just think they've got a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and who knows which
one would they choose?
You know, even Harry
though?
Potter, you know, no spoilers, but the Sorting Hat was kind of like, you know, you could do great things in Slytherin.
Yeah.
So,
Like you said, no spoilers.
This happens in like chapter 2.
what I meant was, look, if you're watching a young adult blog and you haven't read Harry Potter, the second one, the first half
You
of
should
Harry
close
Potter.
that blog and
get Harry Potter.
Go and read Harry Potter first.
Yeah, that's what we
Say.
said. Harry Potter is life.
Yeah.
Like, Harry Potter did so much good for the young adult world, to be honest. I think really it was like, what do we read after Harry Potter? And then publishers were like, everything.
It's funny, Harper in the US has this blog, and they just did a post about like the crossovers they wanted to see, and they put blood and Benderin with an ember in the ashes, and I was just like, yeah. Someone drew crossover fan art too with like Laia and Zaylee, and I was like, yeah, put them together, let them hit things, do some magic, run in the desert, hang out with Elias. That's fun. So that would be I'd probably write that. I'll probably start writing that. Like,
Your own fan
Your own
fiction.
under a very fake name.
Why not?
I would put my characters in Fire and Fury, the book about the Trump administration.
That's the best answer. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be
I
so
think
great.
they could do a lot of good. I'm ready to mobilize my space team.